the way that we calculate risk, the textbook ways of calculating risk, are inherently end of horizon in nature. So if we're calculating a 1-year value at risk or a 1-year probability of loss, what that equation is telling us is the likelihood of experiencing that loss at the end of the horizon. Or if it's a value at risk, it's telling us what's the most we can lose with a certain probability at the end of the horizon. It's not telling us what could happen along the way. And what can happen along the way is extremely important, because if we're not ready for it, if we're not prepared, if we don't understand it, it could lead us to, at a minimum, have some very difficult discussions with stakeholders. But on the other end of the spectrum, we could actually be forced to deviate from a course that was actually the right course, just because we didn't understand the kind of loss that we might have suffered. So we think this notion of within horizon value at risk is very important. If you Google value at risk right now, you'll get an equation. And that equation is telling you the largest loss that you would expect to suffer over a certain horizon with a certain probability. So if you set that probability at 95% confidence and it's a 1-year horizon and it's 200 million euros, what that's saying is that there should be only a 5% chance that at the end of 1 year you're going to be down more than 200 million euros. Now you can challenge that equation and that model and from a number of different angles, and I'm focusing on one here. Which is not to do with getting the inputs wrong. You could know perfectly what the future volatility of the portfolio is and its return, and you could put that into the equation. So you could know its true average return, you could know its true volatility in advance with perfect foresight, and put that in the equation. You're going to get a number that actually gives you the correct future distribution of losses you might suffer at the end of the year, and that only 5% of years you're going to do worse than $200 million loss. The problem is, during the year, more than 5% of those years, more than 1 year out of 20, at some point during the year, you're going to be down 200 million or more. It's going to happen more often than it does at the end, because in some of those cases, you'll be down and then you'll recover. Look what happened this year, right? So it's a fundamental difference that even if your assumptions are perfect, if you're not thinking about that difference, it can actually be pretty misleading. So what we argue is that it's important to make sure that this distinction is understood, because if your board is meeting at the end of Q2 and you're already down, 250 million, they may be tempted to conclude that our models were wrong, we're in a new environment, we need to revisit, we need to change course. But if you can show that actually one out of 3 times, I'm not just making these numbers up, but 1 out of 3 times, this is going to happen in the course of the year, and a good subset of those end up recovering. That information is useful to stakeholders. It helps them be prepared. It helps them put the current drawdown in context. And it can not only be important for managing stakeholders, but there's so many applications of this. I mean, imagine a company with some covenants in its bonds, for example, where if there's a certain threshold is breached, there's adverse action. Imagine a plan sponsor where if they breach a certain level, the government is going to have to kick in and make contributions. And there's all sorts of real world cases where within horizon breach of a certain threshold triggers real action. Within horizon risk is really important to help prepare because it helps stakeholders understand what sorts of drawdowns they might experience and be ready for those discussions. We all remember this famous John Maynard Keynes quote that says, "In the long run, we're all dead." And what many people forget is what he actually said after that, and I've written it down because it's great. He said, "But this long run is a misleading guide to current affairs. In the long run, we're all dead. Economists set themselves too easy, too useless a task if in tempestuous, stormy seasons, they can only tell us that when the storm is long past, the ocean is flat again." So in other words, if we just can say that at the end of the horizon, it's going to be X, that's not really that useful when you're in the middle of the storm. And he's really talking there about within horizon risk. And to survive the long run, we have to be able to weather the short run. And a big part of that is knowing what sort of events we might experience in the short run.